The morning sun filtered through the massive viewing windows of Colony Station Epsilon 7, casting long shadows across the recreational area where children from different species played together. The station buzzed with activity as traders, diplomats, and families went about their daily routines in what many considered a model of interspecies cooperation. 8-year-old Katie Johnson sat cross-legged on the soft blue mat, carefully arranging her collection of colorful stones into patterns. Her blonde hair caught the artificial sunlight as she hummed a tune her mother had taught her back on Earth. The recreational area was one of her favorite places on the station, with its high ceilings and wide-open spaces that reminded her of the parks she used to visit before her family moved to the outer colonies. Katie had been living on Epsilon 7 for 2 years now, ever since her father Jake took a job as a mining engineer for the station's asteroid operations. She had grown comfortable around the various alien species that called the station home. The gentle Altarians with their blue skin and musical voices often played games with the human children. The insectoid Zephyrians kept to themselves but never caused trouble. Even the tall, bird-like Corvani would occasionally share stories from their homeworld with anyone who would listen. But the Velthari were different. Katie had learned to stay away from them after several uncomfortable encounters. They stood nearly 9 feet tall, with gray skin that looked like old leather and claws that could slice through metal. Their yellow eyes seemed to follow her wherever she went, and they never smiled. Her father had told her they were important members of the Galactic Council, but Katie didn't understand why important people had to be so scary. Katie picked up her favorite stone, a smooth piece of quartz her father had found during one of his mining expeditions. As she reached to place it at the center of her pattern, her elbow bumped into something hard and cold. She looked up to see the towering form of Commander Zixathara looming over her. The Velthari officer wore the distinctive black uniform of the Council security forces, with silver markings that indicated her high rank. "Sorry," Katie said quickly, scrambling to move out of the way. She had been taught to be polite to all, the station residents, especially the important ones. Commander Zixathara looked down at the small human child with obvious disgust. Her yellow eyes narrowed as she noticed a small scuff mark on her polished boot where Katie's elbow had made contact. The mark was barely visible, but to the proud Velthari officer, it might as well have been a deliberate insult. "Clumsy little beast," Zixathara hissed in her native language, though the universal translator made her words clear to everyone in the area. "Your kind should learn to control their spawn." Katie didn't understand why the alien was so angry. She had apologized and moved away as quickly as she could. She looked around the recreational area and noticed that other children and their parents had stopped what they were doing to watch. A Corvani family near the play equipment seemed nervous. 2 human mothers gathered their own children closer. "I said I was sorry," Katie repeated, her voice smaller now. She could feel tears starting to form in her eyes, though she didn't fully understand why. The sight of the human child's tears only made Zixathara angrier. In Velthari culture, showing weakness was seen as pathetic, and the idea that this small creature would dare to cry in her presence felt like another insult. Her clawed hand clenched into a fist as decades of anti-human prejudice boiled to the surface. "Sorry means nothing from your filthy species," Zixathara snarled, taking a step closer to Katie. "You deathworlders think you can run wild through civilized space, but you are nothing more than violent animals who learn to use tools." Katie backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Behind her was the wall of the recreational area, and in front of her was the angry alien officer who seemed to grow larger and more frightening with each passing second. The other families in the area watched in horror, but none of them moved to help. Zixathara's political connections and high rank in the Council security forces made her essentially untouchable. "Please, I didn't mean to," Katie whispered, pressing herself against the wall. That was when Zixathara's control finally snapped. The sight of the cowering human child, the scuff on her boot, and years of built-up resentment toward humanity combined into a moment of pure rage. Her clawed hand came down in a vicious backhand that caught Katie across the left side of her face. The sound of the impact echoed through the recreational area like a gunshot. Zixthara's razor-sharp claws tore through Katie's soft skin, leaving 4 deep gashes that ran from her temple to her jaw. The force of the blow was so strong that it lifted the small girl off her feet and sent her crashing into the wall behind her. She hit the metal surface with a sickening thud and crumpled to the floor like a broken doll. Blood began to pool beneath Katie's still form. Her left cheek was torn open, exposing bone beneath the damaged flesh. Her jaw hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken in multiple places. The bright red blood looked almost black against the blue mat where she had been playing just moments before. The recreational area fell completely silent. Children from various species stared in shock at the motionless human girl. Several of the younger ones began to cry. Their parents pulled them closer, afraid to look at the scene but unable to turn away. Zixthara stood over Katie's body, her breathing heavy from the adrenaline of violence. She looked down at her claws, now stained with human blood, and felt a moment of satisfaction. In her mind, she had just taught an important lesson about the proper place of humans in civilized society. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," she announced to the gathered crowd. "Keep your children under control or face the consequences." An Altarian mother finally broke the silence with a high-pitched wail of distress. She rushed toward Katie's motionless form, her blue hands shaking as she tried to check for signs of life. Other parents began to move as well, some tending to the injured child while others ushered their own children away from the scene. "Someone call medical!" shouted Peter Walsh, a human maintenance worker who had witnessed the attack from across the room. He pulled out his communication device with trembling hands. "Emergency in Recreation Area 7. Child down, child down. Severe trauma." Within minutes, the medical team arrived with their emergency equipment. Dr. Nina Patel, the station's chief medical officer, knelt beside Katie's still form and began her assessment. Her face went pale as she took in the extent of the injuries. "She's alive, but barely," Dr. Patel reported to her team. "Massive facial trauma, possible skull fracture, definitely a broken jaw. We need to get her to surgery immediately." As the medical team carefully lifted Katie onto a stretcher, Jake Johnson came running into the recreational area. He had been working in the mining section when the emergency call went out over the station-wide communication system. The sight of his daughter's blood-covered face and broken body hit him like a physical blow. "Katie! Katie, baby, can you hear me?" Jake called out as he ran alongside the stretcher. His daughter's eyes were closed, and she showed no response to his voice. Commander Zixthara watched the scene with cold indifference. As the humans rushed around in panic, she calmly wiped the blood from her claws with a cloth and adjusted her uniform. In her mind, justice had been served, and the inferior species had learned their place. But as Jake Johnson's anguished cries echoed through the corridors of Epsilon 7, something fundamental had changed. The fragile peace between species on the station had been shattered by 4 claw marks across a little girl's face, and the consequences would ripple far beyond what anyone could imagine. The medical bay of Colony Station Epsilon 7 hummed with activity as Dr. Nina Patel worked frantically to save Katie Johnson's life. The little girl lay unconscious on the surgical table, her face covered in bandages that were already soaking through with blood. Advanced medical scanners showed the full extent of her injuries, and the results made even the experienced doctor feel sick. "The damage to her facial bones is severe," Dr. Patel explained to her assistant, Dr. Ryan Cooper. 4 deep lacerations, a shattered jaw in 3 places, and possible nerve damage. We're looking at months of reconstruction surgery, and even then, she may never look the same. Jake Johnson paced outside the medical bay, his work clothes still. dirty from the mining operation he had abandoned when he heard about the attack. His hands shook as he tried to process what had happened to his daughter. Every few minutes he would stop and stare through the window at the small form on the surgical table, hoping to see some sign of improvement. Captain Martin Ross, the station's security chief, approached Jake with a grim expression. Ross was a career military man who had served on frontier stations for over 20 years, but he had never seen anything quite like this. "Mr. Johnson, I need to ask you some questions about what happened," Ross said quietly. "I know this is difficult, but we need to get a complete report." Jake turned away from the window, his eyes red with exhaustion and worry. "What questions? Everyone saw what happened. That monster attacked my daughter for no reason." "I understand your anger, but we need to follow proper procedures," Ross replied, though his own voice betrayed his discomfort with the situation. "Commander Zixathara has filed a counter-report claiming that your daughter was behaving aggressively and that she responded with appropriate force." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stared at the security chief in disbelief, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. "Appropriate force? She's 8 years old! Look at her!" Before Ross could respond, his communication device buzzed with an urgent message. His face darkened as he read the text, and Jake could see that something had changed in the man's expression. "What is it?" Jake demanded. Ross hesitated before answering. "I've been ordered to suspend the investigation pending review by the Galactic Council. Commander Zixathara has claimed diplomatic immunity." 3 hours later, in the main administrative section of the station, Station Commander Helen Brooks sat across from Counselor Thylon, a tall Velthari diplomat who had arrived within hours of the incident. Brooks was a tough woman who had earned her position through years of successful management of interspecies conflicts, but she found herself in an impossible situation. "Commander Brooks, I trust you understand the delicate nature of this situation," Thylon said in the same cold tone that all Velthari seemed to use when speaking to humans. "Commander Zixathara is a decorated officer with an exemplary service record. This unfortunate incident was clearly a case of necessary discipline that has been blown out of proportion." Brooks kept her expression neutral, though inside she was furious. She had seen the security footage before it mysteriously disappeared from the station's computer system. There was nothing disciplinary about what Zixathara had done to Katie Johnson. "Counselor, with respect, a child was seriously injured. Our medical team confirms that she suffered life-threatening trauma. This goes far beyond any reasonable definition of discipline." Thylon's yellow eyes narrowed. "Are you questioning the judgment of a Galactic Council officer? Perhaps you have forgotten that this station exists only through the grace of the Council's protection. Human colonies in this sector are quite vulnerable without our support." The threat was clear, and Brooks understood the implications. Epsilon 7 was strategically important, but militarily weak. If the Council decided to withdraw their protection, the station would be defenseless against raiders and hostile forces. Thousands of lives depended on maintaining good relations with the Council. "Of course not, Counselor," Brooks said through gritted teeth. "I'm simply trying to understand the proper procedures in a situation like this." "The proper procedure is simple," Thylon replied with satisfaction. "Commander Zixathara was acting within her authority as a Council security officer. The human child was behaving in a disruptive manner and required correction. The matter is closed." Meanwhile, in the station's communications center, Captain Lisa Hayes of the merchant vessel New Horizon was documenting everything she could about the incident. Hayes was a former military officer who had served in the human defense fleet before becoming an independent trader. She had witnessed the attack firsthand and was disgusted by what she was seeing now. Hayes had managed to copy the security footage before it was deleted from the system. She had also recorded statements from several witnesses, including the Altarian family that had tried to help Katie after the attack. Now, she was preparing to send encrypted messages to human colonies throughout the sector. This is Captain Hayes broadcasting on emergency frequency 77 Alpha, she transmitted. I am documenting a serious incident involving the assault of a human child by Galactic Council forces on Colony Station Epsilon 7. The victim is 8-year-old Katie Johnson, daughter of mining engineer Jake Johnson. She was attacked without provocation by Commander Zixathara of the Velthari Council security forces. Hayes attached the security footage and witness statements to her transmission, along with copies of the official reports that were being filed by the station administration. She knew that once this information reached the human colonies, there would be consequences that the Council had not anticipated. Back in the medical bay, Katie Johnson finally began to show signs of consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, but the damage to her face made it impossible for her to speak. When she tried to move, pain shot through her broken jaw and tears began to flow down her cheeks. Dr. Patel quickly administered more pain medication. "It's okay, Katie. You're safe now. Your father is here." Jake rushed to his daughter's side, careful not to touch the bandaged areas of her face. "I'm here, baby. Daddy's here. You're going to be okay." But even as he spoke the words, Jake could see the fear in his daughter's eyes. She had been playing peacefully one moment and fighting for her life the next, all because she had accidentally bumped into an alien officer. The randomness and brutality of the attack had shattered something fundamental in both father and daughter. Dr. Patel pulled Jake aside after Katie had fallen back into a medicated sleep. "The physical injuries will heal eventually," she said, quietly. "But the psychological trauma may be more difficult to address. She's going to need extensive counseling and support." As word of the incident spread through the human sections of the station, anger began to build. Families who had thought they were safe in this supposedly civilized corner of space suddenly realized how vulnerable they really were. If a high-ranking council officer could brutally attack a child and face no consequences, what protection did any of them really have? Peter Walsh, the maintenance worker who had called for medical help, organized an informal meeting of human residents in one of the cargo bays. Nearly 50 people showed up, including miners, technicians, traders, and families with children. "They're going to cover this up," Walsh said angrily. "The security footage is already gone, and they're calling it justified discipline. If we don't do something, Katie won't be the last." Among the crowd, murmurs of agreement grew louder. These were people who had left Earth and the core worlds seeking better opportunities in the frontier colonies. They had accepted the risks that came with life on the edge of human space, but they had never expected to be treated as second-class citizens by the very government that was supposed to protect them. "What can we do?" asked Maria Santos, a teacher, whose own young daughter attended the same recreation programs as Katie. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. The Council holds all the power here." "Maybe here on this station," replied Tom Bradley, a former military engineer who now worked in the asteroid mining operation. "But there are human colonies all through this sector. If they all knew what really happened here, things might be different." Unknown to the gathered humans, their conversation was being monitored by Velthari intelligence officers. Thylon had ordered surveillance of all human communications and gatherings following the incident. He wanted to identify potential troublemakers before they could cause problems for the Council's preferred narrative. But Captain Hayes's encrypted transmissions were already reaching their destinations. On colony worlds throughout the sector, human leaders were receiving the security footage and witness statements. The images of 8-year-old Katie Johnson lying broken and bleeding on the recreation area floor were causing outrage that the Council had not anticipated. As the night cycle began on Epsilon 7, Jake Johnson sat beside his daughter's bed, holding her small hand carefully to avoid disturbing the medical equipment. Katie was sedated, but her sleep was restless, and she occasionally whimpered in pain even through the medication. "I promise. You, baby," Jake whispered to his unconscious daughter. "Somehow, some way, there's going to be justice for what they did to you." Outside the medical bay, the station continued its normal operations as if The encrypted transmission from Captain Lisa Hayes reached New Geneva Colony 12 hours after Katie Johnson was attacked. Colony Administrator Robert Chen was reviewing routine supply reports when the emergency message arrived on his secure communication terminal. Within minutes of watching the security footage, Chen was calling an emergency meeting of the colony's leadership council. "This changes everything," Chen said, as he finished showing the footage to the 12 council members gathered in the administration building. "We always knew the council looked down on us, but this is something else entirely. This is a child we're talking about." Dr. Amanda Price, the colony's chief medical officer, stared at the still image of Katie's broken face on the screen. "The injuries are severe. Even with our best medical technology, she's going to carry those scars for life, and the psychological damage could be even worse. What I want to know is why this isn't all over the galactic news networks," said mining supervisor Carl Williams. "If this had happened to any other species child, there would be investigations and trials, but because she's human, they're covering it up." The truth was already spreading beyond New Geneva. Captain Hayes had sent her message to over 30 human colonies throughout the sector, and each colony administrator was forwarding the information to their contacts on other worlds. The footage of Katie's attack was being copied and transmitted faster than any official channels could track or stop. On Earth, in the underground city of New Chicago, the morning news cycle was beginning when junior reporter Kelly Murphy received an anonymous message with video attachments. Murphy worked for the Global Human Network, one of the largest independent news organizations on Earth. She had built her reputation covering stories that the major corporate networks ignored. Murphy watched the security footage 3 times before calling her editor. "Jim, you need to see this. A human child was attacked by a council officer, and they're trying to cover it up." Editor Jim Patterson had been in the news business for 30 years. He had seen wars, disasters, and political scandals, but the footage of 8-year-old Katie Johnson being brutally struck down made his hands shake with anger. "How reliable is this source?" Patterson asked, though he could see the footage was real. "Multiple sources. It's coming from colony administrators and ship captains throughout the outer sectors. This isn't some conspiracy theory. This actually happened, and the council is pretending it was justified." Within 6 hours, the story was the lead item on every major human news network. The footage played continuously, showing the moment when Commander Zixathara's claws tore across Katie's face. Human families across Earth and the core worlds watched in horror as the small girl's blood pooled on the blue mat where she had been playing peacefully. Social media networks exploded with outrage. The hashtag #SaveKatie began trending within hours, followed by Justice for Katie and Human Lives Matter. Parents posted pictures of their own children playing, asking how anyone could justify attacking something so innocent and defenseless. On Mars, in the capital city of New Olympia, protesters began gathering outside the Galactic Council Embassy building. At first, there were only a few dozen people holding signs and demanding justice for Katie, but as news of the attack spread, the crowd grew larger and angrier. "My daughter is the same age as Katie Johnson," shouted Patricia Adams, a factory worker who had brought her 8-year-old daughter, Sandra, to the protest. "She plays the same games. She has the same dreams. That could have been my baby lying there bleeding." The crowd outside the embassy grew throughout the day. By evening, over 10,000 humans had gathered, chanting slogans and demanding that Commander Zixathara be arrested and tried for her crimes. Similar protests were forming outside council embassies on dozens of human worlds. At the Human Defense Fleet headquarters on Europa, Admiral Frank Morrison was fielding calls from angry citizens and worried colony administrators. Morrison was a career military officer who had spent his life protecting human interests in space, but he had never seen public outrage on this scale. "Sir, we're getting reports of protests on every major human world," reported his aide, Commander Susan Lee. "Colony administrators are asking for guidance on how to respond to council pressure. Some of them are being threatened with withdrawal of council protection if they don't stop spreading the footage." Morrison studied the tactical displays showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. The human defense fleet was powerful, but it was designed to protect specific colonies and trade routes, not to challenge the entire Galactic Council. A direct military confrontation would be catastrophic for humanity. "What's the status of our diplomatic channels?" Morrison asked. "Ambassador Rodriguez has been trying to reach Council leadership for 12 hours. They're refusing to take his calls. The official position is that this is an internal Council security matter that doesn't concern human authorities." On the colony world of New Texas, cattle rancher Mike Rodriguez was watching the news coverage with his family when his youngest daughter, Amy, asked the question that was on every human parent's mind. "Daddy, why did the alien hurt that little girl?" Mike looked at his daughter, who was the same age as Katie Johnson, and struggled to find an answer that would make sense to a child. "Sometimes, sweetheart, there are bad people who think they're better than others. They think it's okay to hurt people who are different from them." "But the police will catch the bad alien, right?" Amy persisted. Mike's wife, Sarah, touched his arm gently, knowing how difficult this conversation was for him. They had moved to New Texas, specifically to give their children a better life away from the crowded core worlds. The idea that their daughter could face the same fate as Katie Johnson just for being human was terrifying. "We're going to try to make sure the bad alien faces consequences," Mike said carefully. "But sometimes the people in charge make wrong decisions, too." Similar conversations were happening in human homes throughout the galaxy. Parents were explaining to their children that the universe wasn't as safe or fair as they had hoped. Children were asking why someone would hurt a little girl just for accidentally bumping into them. Dr. Alex Chen, a xenobiologist at the University of New Cambridge, was one of the few humans who had spent years studying galactic politics and interspecies relations. When the footage of Katie's attack reached him, he immediately understood the larger implications. Chen sent a message to every major human news network warning them that this incident revealed a dangerous pattern in Council behavior. "This attack wasn't random," he explained in his statement. "Commander Zixathara felt comfortable brutally assaulting a human child because she knew there would be no consequences. This suggests that anti-human sentiment within the Council has reached levels that threaten our basic safety." The warning resonated with human leaders who were beginning to see connections between this attack and other incidents that had been dismissed or covered up over the years. Trade disputes that always seemed to favor non-human species. Colony protection agreements that were never honored when humans were threatened. Diplomatic incidents where human representatives were treated with obvious contempt. On Luna, President Helen Carter was meeting with her emergency cabinet to discuss the crisis. Carter had built her political career on maintaining peaceful relations with the galactic community. But the footage of Katie Johnson's attack had changed the political landscape overnight. "The public is demanding action," reported Chief of Staff David Kim. "We're getting thousands of calls every hour from citizens who want us to withdraw from the Council entirely. The protesters outside the embassies are growing larger and more angry every day." "What are our military options?" Carter asked Admiral Morrison, who had traveled from Europa for the emergency meeting. "Limited," Morrison replied honestly. "We can defend our colonies and trade routes, but we can't project force to Council territory without triggering a war we can't win. However, we do have significant economic leverage. Human trade routes carry about 30% of all galactic commerce." Secretary of State Maria Gonzalez had been working the diplomatic channels since the crisis began. "The Council is completely stonewalling us. They refuse to even acknowledge that this was anything more than appropriate discipline. Ambassador Rodriguez says he's never seen them this dismissive of human concerns." As the third day after Katie's attack dawned, the protests outside Council embassies had spread to over 50 human worlds. Economic boycotts of Velthari goods were beginning to affect trade throughout the sector. Human merchant ships were refusing to transport Council cargo, and human colonies were canceling trade agreements with species that supported the Council's position. But the most significant development was happening in the Outer Rim colonies, where humans lived closest to the dangers of unexplored space. These frontier settlements had always relied on the Council for protection, but now they were beginning to question whether that protection was worth the price of accepting second-class treatment. On Colony Station Epsilon 7, Jake Johnson sat beside his daughter's bed and watched the news coverage of the protests spreading across human space. Katie was awake more often now, though she still couldn't speak because of her broken jaw. The doctors said she was healing better then. On the frontier world of Kepler 442b, Sam Rodriguez was finishing his morning coffee when the encrypted message arrived on his personal communication device. The message contained a simple text attachment and several video files. Sam had received thousands of similar messages over the years, but something about this one made him pause before opening it. Sam lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of New Frontier City, the planet's only major settlement. The cabin was simple but well defended, with security systems that would make a military base jealous. Most of his neighbors thought he was just another retired soldier who preferred privacy, and Sam was happy to let them think that. The truth was more complicated. Sam Rodriguez had spent 15 years as a special operations officer in the Human Defense Fleet before his life changed forever. 8 years ago, his daughter Elena had been killed during a raid by alien pirates on the mining colony where she worked. The raiders were eventually caught, but the Galactic Council had refused to prosecute them, claiming they were political refugees from an oppressed species. Sam had watched his daughter's killers walk free while council representatives explained that prosecuting them would create diplomatic complications. That was the day Sam Rodriguez stopped believing in official justice and started believing in the kind that came from the barrel of a gun. He opened the message and began reading. The text was brief, describing an attack on an 8-year-old human girl named Katie Johnson on Colony Station Epsilon 7. Sam's jaw tightened as he read the details, but it was the video footage that made his coffee cup shake in his hands. The security footage showed little Katie playing peacefully with her stones before Commander Zixathara approached. Sam watched the alien officer tower over the small girl, saw the fear in Katie's eyes, and witnessed the brutal strike that left her, broken and bleeding on the floor. "Sons of bitches," Sam whispered, his voice filled with the same cold rage that had sustained him for 8 years. Sam had spent those years building a network of contacts throughout human space. Former soldiers, intelligence operatives, mercenaries, and others who had grown tired of watching humans suffer while the council looked the other way. They called themselves freelance security consultants, but their real job was delivering the kind of justice that official channels couldn't or wouldn't provide. Sam opened his secure communication system and began sending messages to his most trusted contacts. Within hours, he was receiving replies from across the galaxy. Every response contained the same message. They had seen the footage, and they were ready to act. The first to respond was Elena Vasquez, a former sniper from the Human Defense Fleet, who now worked private security contracts in the Outer Rim. Elena had lost her own brother to alien raiders 3 years earlier, and like Sam, she had learned not to trust official justice. "I saw the footage," Elena's message read. "That little girl could be my niece. What's the target? And when do we move?" The second response came from Tony Martinez, a former intelligence officer who specialized in alien security systems. Tony had been court-martialed from the Defense Fleet for conducting unauthorized operations against alien criminal organizations. He had been unofficially recruited by Sam shortly after his discharge. "I've been tracking Velthari security protocols for years," Tony wrote. "If you're thinking what I think you're thinking, I can get us past their defenses." The third member of Sam's core team was Rachel Kim, a combat medic who had served in some of the bloodiest conflicts on the frontier. Rachel had joined Sam's network after watching Council forces abandon a human colony to alien raiders because the rescue mission would have been politically complicated. "Count me in," Rachel's message was simple. "These Council bastards need to learn that human children are off limits. Sam spent the next 2 days gathering intelligence on Commander Zixathera. His contacts in various spaceports and trading stations began feeding him information about her movements, her security detail, and her known associates. What he learned made his anger burn even hotter. Zixathera had a history of violence against humans that stretched back over a decade. She had been involved in at least 6 incidents where humans had been seriously injured or killed under suspicious circumstances. In every case, the Council had protected her with claims of diplomatic immunity or justifiable force. She's not just a random racist, Sam explained to his team during a secure video conference. She's a serial predator who targets humans because she knows she can get away with it. The Council has been covering for her for years. Elena's face was grim on the video screen. How many others like Katie Johnson have there been? Too many, Sam replied. But Katie's going to be the last one. Tony had been working his intelligence, contacts to track Zixathera's schedule. I've got good news and bad news, he reported. The good news is that she's scheduled to attend a diplomatic function on Nexus Prime in 3 weeks. The bad news is that she'll be surrounded by Council security and diplomatic protection. Nexus Prime was a neutral world that served as a meeting place for interspecies diplomatic functions. It was heavily defended and monitored, with strict rules about weapons and unauthorized personnel. Getting close to a high-ranking council officer there would be nearly impossible through normal means. Nearly impossible isn't the same as impossible, Sam said. What do we know about the diplomatic function? It's the annual Interspecies Trade Summit, Tony explained. Representatives from dozens of species will be there to negotiate trade agreements and settle disputes. Zixathera is scheduled to provide security briefings for council delegations. Rachel had been quiet during most of the conversation, but now she spoke up. Sam, I've been thinking about what you said about this being personal for her. What if we could make it personal for us too? What do you mean? I mean, what if one of us had a reason to be at that summit? What if one of us was there on legitimate business that would put us in the same place as Zixathera? Sam considered this. Tony, can you get us fake credentials as trade representatives or security consultants? Give me a week, and I can get you anything you want, Tony replied with confidence. The security systems on Nexus Prime are good, but they're not perfect. I've been studying them for years. The plan began to take shape over the next several days. Sam would attend the summit as a security consultant for a small human trading company. Elena would be his assistant, with her sniper rifle disguised as surveying equipment. Tony would infiltrate the station's security systems to create blind spots in their surveillance. Rachel would be their medical support and extraction specialist. But even as they planned, disturbing news was coming from Colony Station Epsilon 7. Katie Johnson's condition had taken a turn for the worse. The damage to her face was healing slowly, but infection had set in despite the best medical care available. Her father, Jake, was spending every waking hour at her bedside, watching his daughter fight for her life. The doctors say the next few days are critical, Captain Lisa Hayes reported in her latest transmission. If the infection spreads to her brain, she might not survive. And even if she does, there could be permanent damage beyond what's already been done. Sam read the medical reports with growing fury. It wasn't enough that Zixathera had nearly killed an innocent child with her attack. Now that child was fighting for her life because of complications from injuries that should never have happened. Change of plans, Sam announced to his team. We're not waiting for the summit. What do you mean? Elena asked. I mean, we're going to Nexus Prime now. Zixathera is there for preliminary security meetings before the main summit. If Katie Johnson dies from her injuries, I want that alien bitch to pay the price before her body is even cold. Tony looked concerned. Sam, if we move now, we won't have time for proper preparation. The security will be just as tight, but we'll have fewer resources and less intelligence. Then we'll have to be smarter and faster, Sam replied. Elena, how quickly can you get to the rendezvous point? 48 hours if I push my ship hard. Do it. Tony, I need those fake credentials and security bypasses ready in 24 hours. It'll be rough, but I can manage. Rachel, we're going to need medical supplies for a quick extraction. Can you handle that? Already working on it. As his team prepared for the mission, Sam spent his time studying everything he could find about Zix Thara's personal habits and preferences. He learned that she was arrogant and overconfident, traits that had served her well in a system that protected council officers from consequences. But those same traits would make her vulnerable to someone who didn't care about diplomatic immunity or political complications. Sam also spent time thinking about his daughter, Elena, who had been Katie's age when she was killed. He thought about all the human children who had suffered because aliens like Zix Thara believed they could act without consequences. And he thought about the look of terror in Katie Johnson's eyes as she pressed herself against the wall, begging for mercy that never came. This is for all of them, Sam said to himself as he cleaned and checked his weapons. But especially for Katie. The message came through 12 hours before they were scheduled to depart for Nexus Prime. Katie Johnson had taken a turn for the worse. Her fever was spiking, and the infection was spreading despite the strongest antibiotics available. Nexus Prime gleamed like a jewel against the darkness of space as Sam Rodriguez's ship approached the orbital station. The massive structure served as neutral ground for diplomatic meetings between dozens of different species, its rotating sections, creating artificial gravity while solar panels stretched out like metallic wings to power the complex. Sam studied the station through his ship's viewing port, memorizing the docking bays, security checkpoints, and the defensive weapon platforms that surrounded the diplomatic facility. Getting onto Nexus Prime would be the easy part. Getting close to Commander Zix Thara and completing their mission would be much more difficult. "Incoming vessel, this is Nexus Prime Traffic Control," came the voice over the communication system. "Please transmit your identification codes and state your business." "This is the merchant vessel Freedom's Call requesting docking permission," Sam replied, using the false identity that Tony Martinez had created for him. "We're here for the preliminary trade meetings. Transmitting codes now." The credentials that Tony had forged identified Sam as Marcus Thompson, a security consultant for Frontier Trading Incorporated, a small but legitimate human company that specialized in mining equipment sales. Elena was listed as his assistant, Sarah Wilson, while Tony and Rachel would arrive separately on different ships with their own cover identities. "Codes accepted, Freedom's Call. Proceed to Docking Bay 7. Please be advised that all weapons and surveillance equipment must be declared at customs. Nexus Prime maintains strict neutrality protocols." Sam guided his ship into the docking bay, where automated systems secured the vessel and began the standard customs scan. The scanning equipment was thorough but not perfect, especially if someone knew exactly how to hide certain items in ways that would fool the sensors. Elena had disassembled her sniper rifle and disguised the components as surveying equipment for measuring asteroid mineral content. The weapon's scope was hidden inside a geological scanner, while the barrel was disguised as a core sampling device. To any casual inspection, it looked like standard mining equipment. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," said the customs officer, a tall Altarian with the characteristic blue skin and large eyes of his species. "Please place all personal effects on the scanning platform." Sam and Elena went through the security process smoothly, their false identities held up under scrutiny, and their hidden weapons passed inspection without triggering any alarms. Within an hour, they were walking through the main promenade of the station, mixing with hundreds of other beings who had come for the trade meetings. The diplomatic section of Nexus Prime was a marvel of interspecies cooperation. Representatives from dozens of different worlds walked through corridors designed to accommodate everything from the massive Goliath species to the tiny insectoid Zephyrians. Translators and diplomatic staff hurried between meetings, while security personnel from various species maintained order. "There she is," Elena whispered, as they sat in a cafe overlooking the main diplomatic plaza. Commander Zixathara was impossible to miss. Even among the various alien species present, the Velthari officer stood out with her imposing height and the black uniform that marked her as Council security forces. She was surrounded by a protection detail of 4 other Velthari officers, all armed and alert. Sam watched Zixathara for several minutes, studying her movements and mannerisms. She carried herself with the arrogance of someone who had never faced serious consequences for her actions. When she spoke to other beings, it was with barely concealed contempt, especially when dealing with representatives from species she considered inferior. "She doesn't look like someone who's worried about what happened to Katie Johnson," Elena observed. "Why would she be?" Sam replied bitterly. "In her mind, she disciplined a disruptive child and the matter is closed. She probably hasn't given Katie another thought since it happened." Tony Martinez arrived at the station 6 hours later, using credentials that identified him as a communications technician for the diplomatic services. His job was to maintain the translation and communication systems during the meetings, which gave him access to restricted areas of the station. "I'm in position," Tony reported through their secure communication channel. "The security systems here are impressive, but they're designed to prevent large-scale attacks, not small team infiltrations. I can create gaps in the surveillance coverage when you need them." Rachel Kim was the last to arrive, posing as a medical consultant for the trade delegations. Her cover story was that she was there to advise on medical supply contracts between human colonies and alien manufacturers. It was a boring but believable identity that gave her access to medical facilities and supplies throughout the station. For 3 days, Sam's team conducted surveillance on Commander Zixathara. They learned her daily routine, her security protocols, and her personal habits. The Velthari officer attended briefings each morning, conducted security inspections in the afternoon, and spent her evenings in the officers' club with other council officials. "She's creatures of habit," Sam noted as they reviewed their observations. "Same route to her quarters every night, same security detail, same stops along the way. The only variable is which corridor she uses to avoid crowds." Elena had been studying the station's layout from her position in the surveying equipment storage area. The best opportunity would be during her evening routine. There's a section between the officers' club and her quarters where foot traffic is minimal after 2200 hours. "What about her security detail?" Rachel asked. 4 guards, but they're overconfident," Sam replied. "They walk in a standard formation, designed to protect against random threats, not against someone who's been studying their patterns for days." Tony had been working on disabling the security systems in the target area. "I can give you a 12-minute window where the surveillance cameras will be cycling through maintenance mode. Security won't notice anything unusual unless they're specifically looking for it." But their plans were complicated by disturbing news from Colony Station Epsilon 7. Katie Johnson's condition had stabilized somewhat, but the doctors warned that she faced a long and difficult recovery. Even if she survived, the damage to her face and jaw would require years of reconstructive surgery. "The psychological trauma is going to be the hardest part," Dr. Nina Patel reported in her latest medical update. "She's having nightmares about the attack, and she becomes terrified whenever she sees any alien species, even the friendly ones she used to play with." Sam read the medical report with growing anger. It wasn't enough that Zixathara had nearly killed Katie with her attack. The alien officer had destroyed the child's sense of safety and trust in the world around her. Even if Katie's physical injuries healed completely, she would carry the emotional scars for the rest of her life. "I've been thinking about how we handle this," Sam said to his team during their final planning meeting. "We could make it look like an accident or a random attack, but I don't think that sends the right message." "What kind of message do you want to send?" Elena asked. "I want every council officer who's ever thought about harming a human to know exactly why Zixathara died," Sam replied. "I want them to understand that there are consequences for attacking our children, even if their own government won't hold them accountable." Rachel nodded slowly. So we make sure she knows why this is happening to her. Exactly. Before she dies, I want Zixathara to understand that Katie Johnson was not just some disposable human child. I want her to know that little girl had people who cared about her enough to cross the galaxy for justice. Tony had finished his preparations for disabling the security systems. Everything's ready on my end. I can give you that 12-minute window starting at 22:15 hours tomorrow night. After that, you're on your own. The night of the operation, Sam and Elena took their positions in the corridor where Zixathara would pass on her way to her quarters. The area was dimly lit and rarely used during the evening hours, making it perfect for what they had planned. Security cameras are down, Tony reported at exactly 22:15 hours. You have 12 minutes. At 22:18 hours, Commander Zixathara appeared at the far end of the corridor, followed by her 4-member security detail. They were walking casually, talking among themselves in their own language. None of them appeared to be paying attention to their surroundings. Sam stepped out of the shadows when the group was 30 meters away. "Commander Zixathara," he called, out in a calm, clear voice. The Velthari officer and her guards immediately went on alert. All 4 guards reached for their weapons while Zixathara moved behind them for protection. "Who are you?" Zixathara demanded. "This is a restricted area." "My name is Sam Rodriguez," Sam replied, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm here to talk to you about Katie Johnson." The name meant nothing to Zixathara, and her confusion was obvious. "I don't know who that is. State your business or leave immediately." "Katie Johnson is the 8-year-old human girl you attacked on Colony Station Epsilon 7 last week," Sam explained, his voice growing colder. "The little girl whose face you destroyed with your claws." Recognition dawned in Zixathara's yellow eyes, followed immediately by contempt. "The human spawn that needed discipline. What about it?" "She's fighting for her life because of what you did to her." The corridor on Nexus Prime fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Commander Zixathara stood frozen between her 4 guards, her yellow eyes darting between the 3 humans who had surrounded them. For the first time in her career, she was facing opponents who didn't care about her rank, her diplomatic immunity, or the political protection that had shielded her for so many years. "You have 30 seconds to make a choice," Sam Rodriguez said calmly, his weapon aimed steadily at the Velthari officer. "You can order your guards to stand down and face justice for what you did to Katie Johnson, or this ends badly for everyone." The lead guard, a scarred veteran named Krex Tar, shifted his weight and tightened his grip on his energy weapon. "Commander, these humans are terrorists. We should eliminate them immediately." Zixathara's mind raced as she tried to find a way out of the situation. She had dealt with humans before, and they had always backed down when faced with superior firepower or political pressure. But these 3 humans seemed different. There was something cold and determined in their eyes that made her nervous. "You're making a mistake," Zixathara said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I am a decorated council officer. The human child was behaving aggressively and required discipline. My actions were completely justified under council regulations." Elena Vasquez, still maintaining her aim with the sniper rifle, spoke for the first time. "Justified? She was 8 years old and playing with stones. The only thing aggressive about Katie Johnson was how aggressively she apologized after accidentally bumping into you. The spawn should have been better controlled," Zixathara replied with obvious disgust. "Human children run wild through civilized space because your species lacks proper discipline. I provided a necessary lesson." Rachel Kim stepped closer, her weapon trained on the guards. "A necessary lesson? You nearly killed her. She's been fighting for her life in a medical bay because of what you did. Her face will never look the same. She has nightmares about aliens now, even the ones who used to be her friends." "The medical treatment of human spawn is not my concern," Zixathara said dismissively. "If the creature cannot survive proper discipline, then it was weak to begin with." Sam felt his anger spike at the alien's casual dismissal of Katie's suffering, but he kept his voice level. "Show her the pictures, Rachel." Rachel reached into her jacket with her free hand and pulled out a small device that projected holographic images into the air between them. The first image showed Katie Johnson before the attack, smiling and playing with her collection of stones, in the recreation area. The second image was from the medical bay immediately after the attack. Katie's face was covered in blood, her jaw twisted at an unnatural angle, her small body motionless on the stretcher. "This is what your necessary lesson looked like," Sam said. "Take a good look at what you did to an innocent child." Zixthera glanced at the images with indifference. "The human spawn looks appropriately disciplined. Perhaps other human parents will learn to better control their offspring." That was the moment when Sam Rodriguez made his decision. He had hoped that confronting Zixthera with the consequences of her actions might provoke some sign of remorse or regret. Instead, the alien officer seemed proud of what she had done and completely unrepentant about nearly killing a child. "Elena," Sam said quietly, "take out the guards." Elena Vasquez had been a sniper in the Human Defense Fleet for 8 years before joining Sam's team. She had made shots under pressure that most people wouldn't believe possible. The 4 Velthari guards were well trained, but they weren't prepared for someone with her skills. Her first shot took down Krextar before he could raise his weapon. The energy beam from her rifle punched through his chest armor and dropped him instantly. The second guard managed to get his weapon halfway up before Elena's second shot sent him crashing into the corridor wall. Rachel Kim opened fire at the same moment, her shots precise and deadly. The third guard fell with a burn mark through his helmet, while the fourth tried to dive for cover behind a support beam. Elena's third shot found him before he reached safety. The entire firefight lasted less than 10 seconds. 4 of the Council's elite security officers lay dead on the corridor floor, their weapons unused. Commander Zixthera stood alone, her confidence shattered as she realized that her protection was gone. "This is impossible," Zixthera whispered, staring at the bodies of her guards. "You cannot do this. I have diplomatic immunity. The Council will not allow this." Sam stepped closer to the alien officer, his weapon still trained on her chest. "The Council isn't here right now. It's just you, me, and the consequences of your actions." "You don't understand," Zixthera said, her voice rising in panic. "If you kill a Council officer, there will be war between your species and ours. Millions will die because of your actions." "Maybe," Sam replied calmly. "But Katie Johnson will have justice, and every other Council officer will think twice before attacking a human child." Rachel had moved to guard the corridor entrances while Elena kept her rifle trained on Zixthera. They had maybe 5 minutes before station security would respond to the energy weapon discharges, assuming Tony's interference with the security systems was still working. "Wait!" Zixthera said desperately. "I can make this right. I can provide compensation to the human family, credits, medical treatment, whatever they need. The Council has resources." "Katie Johnson doesn't need your credits," Sam said. "She needs justice. She needs to know that there are consequences when someone hurts innocent children. Please," Zixthera begged, dropping to her knees. "I have a family. I have offspring of my own. They need me." For a moment, Sam hesitated. The sight of the proud alien officer begging for her life brought back memories of his own daughter, Elena, who had begged for mercy when the alien raiders attacked her colony. But the raiders had shown no mercy, and the Council had protected them from justice. "Did you think about your family before you attacked Katie?" Sam asked. "Did you consider the consequences then?" "It was just discipline," Zixthera said weakly. "I didn't mean for the human to be seriously injured." "But you weren't sorry when she was," Rachel pointed out. "Even when you saw the pictures of what you did to her, you showed no remorse. You called it appropriate discipline." Sam reached into his jacket and pulled out a device similar to the one Rachel had used. But instead of projecting images, This device contained an audio recording from Colony Station Epsilon 7. "Listen to this," Sam said, activating the recording. Jake Johnson's voice filled the corridor, raw with emotion as he spoke to his unconscious daughter in the medical bay. "I'm here, baby. Daddy's here. You're going to be okay. I promise you, somehow, some way, there's going to be justice for what they did to you." The recording continued with sounds from the medical bay, the beeping of monitoring equipment, the quiet conversations of doctors discussing Katie's condition, and the soft sobbing of a father watching his child fight for her life. "That's Jake Johnson," Sam explained. "Katie's father. He's been sitting beside her bed for days, watching his little girl suffer because of what you did. And you know what the worst part is? He still believes in justice. He still thinks the system will work." Zixthara listened to the recording with growing unease. The raw emotion in the human father's voice was something she hadn't expected. In her mind, humans were violent animals who cared only about dominance and territory. The idea that they could feel genuine love and protectiveness toward their offspring was something she had never considered. "I didn't know," Zixthara said quietly. "You didn't want to know," Sam corrected. "You attacked a child because you thought there would be no consequences. You were protected by your rank and your species' political power. You never had to face the results of your actions." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Station security was finally responding to the incident, though Tony's interference had delayed them longer than anyone had expected. "Time's up," Elena announced, keeping her rifle aimed at Zixthara. Sam looked down at the kneeling alien officer, thinking about Katie Johnson lying broken and bloodied on the recreation area floor. He thought about his own daughter Elena, killed by raiders who faced no consequences for their crimes. He thought about all the human children who had suffered while the council looked the other way. "Any last words?" Sam asked. Zixthara looked up at him with eyes that now showed genuine fear and perhaps a hint of understanding. "Tell the human father that she began, then stopped. Even facing death, she couldn't bring herself to apologize for what she had done. "That's what I thought," Sam said. The energy blast from his weapon struck Zixthara in the center of her chest, dropping her instantly. The alien officer who had brutally attacked an 8-year-old girl was dead, her yellow eyes staring sightlessly at the corridor ceiling. But Sam wasn't finished. He drew his combat knife and knelt beside Zixthara's body. The message he was about to send needed to be unmistakable. "Sam, we need to go," Rachel urged as the footsteps grew closer. "One more minute," Sam replied, working quickly with his knife. When he stood up, he was holding Commander Zixthara's severed head by the hair. The alien's yellow eyes were still open, frozen in their final expression of shock and fear. The Galactic Council headquarters on Celestial Station was a marvel of interspecies engineering, with its massive central chamber capable of holding representatives from over 200 different worlds. The station orbited a binary star system, in neutral space, serving as the political heart of galactic civilization for over 3 centuries. Sam Rodriguez and his team had spent 2 weeks planning their infiltration of the most heavily guarded facility in known space. Getting onto Celestial Station required new identities, forged credentials, and a level of preparation that made their Nexus Prime mission look simple by comparison. Tony Martinez had outdone himself with the false documentation. Sam was now Dr. Marcus Stevens, a xenobiologist presenting research on interspecies medical cooperation. Elena was his research assistant, while Rachel posed as a medical equipment representative. Tony himself had managed to get hired as a temporary maintenance worker for the station's communication systems. "Security here is insane," Elena whispered as they passed through their 3rd checkpoint in the diplomatic quarter. "Scanners, guards, automated defense systems. How are we supposed to get into the main assembly chamber?" "Patience," Sam replied quietly. "Tony's been working on this for days. Trust the plan." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. The Galactic Council was holding emergency sessions to discuss the growing human protests following Katie Johnson's attack. Representatives from dozens of species were debating how to respond to what they called human extremism and terrorist activities on Nexus Prime. What they didn't know was that the humans they were discussing had already infiltrated their most secure facility. Tony Martinez was working in the communications center when he received Sam's signal. As a maintenance worker, he had access to the station's environmental and security systems. More importantly, he had spent weeks studying the emergency protocols that governed the main assembly chamber. Initiating System Maintenance Protocol. 7-7 Alpha, Tony announced to his supervisor, a bored Zephyrian who barely looked up from his own workstation. "How long will the maintenance take?" the supervisor asked. "Approximately 30 minutes for a complete diagnostic cycle," Tony replied. "All systems will remain operational, but there may be minor fluctuations in the environmental controls." What Tony didn't mention was that those minor fluctuations would include temporarily disabling the security scanners around the assembly chamber entrances. For exactly 12 minutes, there would be a window where someone could enter the chamber, without being detected by the automated systems. In the main assembly chamber, Councillor Thylon was addressing the gathered representatives about the human terrorist threat that had emerged following the Nexus Prime incident. The assassination of Commander Zixthara represents a new level of barbarity from the human species, Thylon declared from the central speaking platform. These Deathworlders have shown their true nature by murdering a decorated council officer in cold blood. The chamber buzzed with discussion as representatives from various species voiced their opinions. The Altarians expressed concern about the escalating violence, while the Corvani delegation called for stronger security measures. Several species that had positive relationships with humans remained notably silent. "The humans claim they seek justice for an injured child," continued Thylon. "But their actions prove that they are nothing more than violent animals who resort to murder when they don't get their way. The Council must respond with appropriate force to prevent further terrorist attacks." Unknown to the assembled delegates, Sam Rodriguez was watching the proceedings from a service corridor that ran beneath the main chamber. Through Tony's access to the station's internal monitoring systems, Sam could see and hear everything that was happening in the council session. "Listen to this garbage," Elena said quietly as they heard Thylon's speech. "They're calling us terrorists for seeking justice when they refuse to provide it through proper channels." "That's about to change," Sam replied, checking the chronometer on his wrist. "Tony, are we ready?" "Security systems will be down in 3 minutes," Tony reported through their secure communication channel. "You'll have exactly 12 minutes to get in, deliver your message, and get out before the automated defenses come back online." Rachel Kim was positioned at their extraction point, ready to guide them back to their ship once the mission was complete. She also carried emergency medical supplies in case things went wrong, though all of them understood that if they were caught inside the assembly chamber, medical attention would be the least of their concerns. 1 minute to go, Tony announced. Sam opened the specialized container he had been carrying and looked down at Commander Zixthara's severed head. The alien's yellow eyes were still open, staring up at him with the same expression of shock and fear that had been frozen on her face at the moment of death. Attached to the container was a simple message written on a piece of human-made paper. "Touch our children again and see what happens." The human response. "Security systems are down," Tony reported. "You have 12 minutes." Sam and Elena moved quickly through the service corridors toward the main assembly chamber. The route Tony had planned took them through maintenance areas that were normally off-limits to visitors, but his access codes opened every door along the way. They reached the entrance to the assembly chamber just as Councillor Thylon was concluding. His speech about human barbarism and the need for stronger military action against human colonies. "The time for diplomatic solutions has passed," Thylon declared. "These humans understand only force, and force is what we must use to bring them back into line." The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated the merits of military action. Some species called for immediate strikes against human colonies suspected of supporting the terrorists. Others urged caution, pointing out that humans controlled significant trade routes and economic resources. That was when Sam Rodriguez stepped through the main entrance into the assembly chamber. The massive chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien representatives turned to stare at the lone human walking down the central aisle. Sam moved with calm confidence, ignoring the shocked whispers and alarmed exclamations from the various delegations. Security guards began moving toward him, but Sam raised his hands to show that he was unarmed. In one hand, he carried the container, holding Zix Thara's head. In the other, he held the message he had prepared. "My name is Sam Rodriguez," Sam announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "I am here to deliver a message on behalf of humanity." Counselor Thylon stared at the human in disbelief. "Security! Remove this terrorist immediately!" But Sam was already at the central platform where Thylon stood. With deliberate care, he opened the container and placed Commander Zix Thara's severed head on the speaking platform where every representative in the chamber could see it. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some delegates gasped in horror at the sight of the dead Velthari officer. Others began shouting for security or demanding that the human be arrested immediately. Several representatives from species that had conflicts with the Velthari watched, with obvious satisfaction. "This is Commander Zix Thara," Sam announced over the chaos. "She brutally attacked an 8-year-old human girl named Katie Johnson on Colony Station Epsilon 7. When your council refused to provide justice, we provided it ourselves." The chamber erupted in pandemonium. Some species called for immediate military retaliation against humanity. Others demanded to know how security had been breached. The Velthari delegation was on their feet, screaming for Sam's immediate execution. "You want to call us terrorists?" Sam continued, his voice rising above the noise. "You want to claim we're violent animals? Fine. But understand this. Katie Johnson was an innocent child who was playing with stones when your officer nearly killed her. She apologized for accidentally bumping into Zix Thara, and in return, she got claws across her face that shattered her jaw and nearly took her life." Sam held up the message he had prepared. "This is for every member of this council who thinks humans are weak or defenseless. This is for everyone who believes we'll accept second-class treatment in the galaxy we helped build." He placed the message beside Zix Thara's head on the platform. "Touch our children again and see what happens." Security forces finally reached the platform, but Sam made no attempt to resist as they surrounded him. He had delivered his message, and every representative in the chamber had seen exactly what that message looked like. But as the guards moved to arrest him, something unexpected happened. Counselor Vexani of the Rigel Coalition stood up in her delegation's section. "Wait!" Vexani called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Before you arrest this human, I have something to say." The chamber gradually quieted as the respected elder stateswoman stepped forward. Vexani was known throughout the galaxy as a voice of reason and justice, and her words carried significant weight in council deliberations. "I have reviewed the security footage from Colony Station Epsilon 7, Vexani announced. "I have seen what Commander Zix Thara did to the human child, and I have reviewed the Council's response to that incident." She turned to face Thylon directly. The Velthari delegation claimed that this was justified discipline of a disruptive child. The emergency session of the Galactic Council continued for 18 hours without break. Representatives from across the galaxy argued, debated, and negotiated while Commander Zix Thara's severed head remained on the central platform as a stark reminder of the consequences of injustice. Sam Rodriguez sat in a detention cell deep within Celestial Station, but the chains that bound him seemed insignificant compared to the political earthquake his actions had triggered. Through the cell's communication system, he could hear fragments of the ongoing debate that was reshaping galactic politics. On Earth, President Helen Carter was leading an emergency session of the Human Colonial Council. Representatives from every major human settlement in the galaxy had gathered virtually to discuss their response to the crisis. "The situation has moved beyond our control," reported Admiral Frank Morrison from his flagship in the Centauri system. "Human colonies throughout the galaxy are declaring their support for Sam Rodriguez's actions. Trade unions are organizing massive strikes. Our merchant fleets are refusing to transport goods for species that condemn the execution of Zix Thara." Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams pulled up strategic displays showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. "Our colonies are mobilizing their defense forces. They're not preparing to attack anyone, but they're making it clear that they won't accept Council retaliation without a fight." President Carter studied the reports flowing in from across human space. The unity being shown by typically independent colonial governments was unprecedented. Worlds that had been rivals were now coordinating their responses to support a man who had committed what the Council called an act of terrorism. "What's the status of our economic leverage?" Carter asked. Trade Secretary Robert Kim consulted his data displays. "Devastating for the Council economies. Human-controlled shipping routes handle approximately 35% of all interspecies commerce. Our manufacturing colonies produce critical components for everything from starship engines to medical equipment. If we withdraw from galactic trade completely, dozens of species will face immediate supply shortages." On Colony Station Epsilon 7, Jake Johnson sat beside his daughter's hospital bed and watched the news coverage of the council debates. Katie was awake more often now, and though she still couldn't speak because of her healing jaw, her eyes showed understanding when her father explained what was happening. "Look, baby," Jake said softly, pointing to the news screen that showed protesters on dozens of worlds holding signs with Katie's picture. "All these people are standing up for you. They're making sure that what happened to you never happens to another child." Katie's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of pain this time. Through all the medical procedures and nightmares, she had felt alone and afraid. Now she could see that she wasn't alone at all. Thousands of people across the galaxy cared about what had happened to her. Dr. Nina Patel entered the room with Katie's latest medical reports. "The physical healing is progressing well," she told Jake. "The reconstructive surgery on her jaw was successful, and the facial scarring is less severe than we initially feared. She should be able to speak again within a few weeks." "What about the psychological trauma?" Jake asked. "That will take longer," Dr. Patel admitted. "But I think what's happening across the galaxy right now might actually help with her recovery. She's seeing that her suffering meant something, that it led to positive changes. That can be very powerful for healing." Back on Celestial Station, the council debates had reached a critical point. Councillor Vexani of the Rigel Coalition had proposed a complete reformation of the council's justice system, including the elimination of diplomatic immunity for violent crimes and the establishment of an independent tribunal to investigate abuse of power. "The execution of Commander Zix Thara was brutal," Vexani declared to the assembled representatives. "But it was also the inevitable result of a system that protects the powerful while ignoring the suffering of the weak. If we want to prevent future violence, we must address the injustices that cause it." The Velthari delegation, led by Councillor Thylon, was fighting desperately to maintain their privileged position. "This council cannot reward terrorism by implementing reforms demanded by murderers," Thylon argued. "If we give in to human demands now, every species in the galaxy will resort to violence when they don't get their way." But Thylon's support was crumbling as more species stepped forward with their own stories of Velthari abuse. The Andromedan Collective presented evidence of 3 separate incidents where their citizens had been seriously injured by Council security forces. The peaceful Altarians shared recordings of verbal abuse and humiliation their diplomats had endured for decades. Even some of the more powerful species began distancing themselves from the Velthari position. The Zephyrian Empire, traditionally, allied with the Velthari, announced that they would support justice reforms in exchange for continued human participation in galactic trade. The turning point came when the economic reports reached the council floor. Species throughout the galaxy were reporting supply shortages, canceled contracts, and economic disruptions as human colonies coordinated their response to the crisis. The humans control too much of our infrastructure to simply ignore, admitted Councillor Rex Dar of the Tau Ceti Union. Our manufacturing depends on human-produced components. Our trade routes rely on human shipping companies. We cannot maintain galactic commerce without their cooperation. As the debate continued, messages of support for Sam Rodriguez and demands for justice reform flooded into the council from across the galaxy. Even non-human species were beginning to speak out against the systematic abuse they had witnessed or experienced. On the fourth day of the emergency session, President Carter made a direct communication to the Galactic Council. Her message was broadcast live to every major world in human space and transmitted to alien governments throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council has a choice to make, Carter declared from her office on Earth. You can continue to protect those who abuse their power while ignoring the suffering of the innocent, or you can implement the reforms necessary to create true justice for all species. But understand this: humanity will no longer participate in a system that treats our children as expendable. Carter's ultimatum was backed by the coordinated actions of human colonies across the galaxy. Trade embargoes, shipping strikes, and manufacturing shutdowns were creating economic chaos that threatened the stability of dozens of worlds. The Velthari delegation made one final attempt to maintain control. The humans are holding the galaxy hostage, Thylon declared. They're using economic terrorism to force political changes. This cannot be allowed to succeed. But Councillor Vexani had prepared for this moment. She stood and activated a holographic display that showed the security footage from Colony Station Epsilon 7. The entire council chamber watched as Commander Zixathara struck down 8-year-old Katie Johnson, leaving the child broken and bleeding on the recreation area floor. This is what we are being asked to protect, Vexani said as the footage played. This is the behavior that the Velthari delegation claims was justified discipline. Look at this child's face and tell me that economic pressure is worse than this kind of brutality. The footage had the same impact on the council representatives that it had on human populations across the galaxy. Many delegates who had been undecided or neutral were visibly shaken by the images of Katie's injuries. When the vote was finally called, the results surprised even the most optimistic human supporters. The council voted 347 to 89 to implement comprehensive justice reforms, including the establishment of an independent tribunal, the elimination of diplomatic immunity for violent crimes, and mandatory bias training for all council security forces. The Velthari delegation walked out of the chamber rather than accept the reforms, but they no longer had the political support to block the changes. Species that had remained silent for decades about council abuses were finally speaking out, and the balance of power was shifting permanently. Sam Rodriguez was released from detention 6 hours after the vote. As he walked through the corridors of Celestial Station toward his ship, he was accompanied by representatives from dozens of species who wanted to thank him personally for his actions. You have given voice to the voiceless, Councillor Vexani told him as they reached the docking bay. Your actions were extreme, but they were also necessary to break through centuries of institutional indifference. 2 weeks later, Sam stood in the medical bay of Colony Station Epsilon 7, looking down at Katie Johnson as she slept peacefully in her hospital bed. The little girl's face still bore the scars of Zixathara's attack, but the doctor said she would make a full recovery. Jake Johnson approached Sam with obvious emotion. I don't know how to thank you, Jake said quietly. What you did for my daughter, for all of us. She didn't deserve what happened to her, Sam replied. No child does. I just made sure there were consequences. Katie's eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at the stranger standing beside her father. Her jaw had healed enough for her to speak, though her voice was still weak. "Are you the man who made the bad alien pay for hurting me?" Katie asked.